Good day, guys. This will be the first official Blender tutorial I'm making on this channel. We're going to walk through from downloading Blender to setting it up and understanding the interface. And at the end of this video, we are going to make a quick, cool artwork to share on your socials so you get the feel of how it is to make art on Blender. So without further ado, let's get into installing Blender. Okay, so let's head into our browser and then open up Blender's home page. Here we see we're introduced to Blender, their theme. Blender is basically an open source 3D software that is totally free and would forever remain to be free to the community. Latest release is Blender 4.0, which we'll be downloading. The download starts automatically. You don't need to pay for it. This is just in case you want to donate to the Blender program, or the download is totally free. I have already downloaded it, so I will not be downloading it again. So you wait for a while for your download to complete, and when it's done downloading, you head to your download folder to install Blender. So now that Blender is done installing, let's hop into the software. So this is probably the first time you'll be opening Blender. Give it a while to load up. And this is the first thing you see when Blender opens. You can choose to go with a white theme for Blender, but this looks very weird to me because I'm used to using the dark screen, so I will go in Blender dark. You can leave these settings just like this and just hit continue. Hit general, and here you have your Blender interface. This is what you see when you first open Blender. Okay, so here we have our 3D viewport, which is where we'll basically be spending most of our time as we model in Blender. We'll be spending most of our time in the 3D viewport. So right now, what you see down here, you have the timeline. You won't really have to touch this much unless you are making animations. This is where you keyframe and then you see your number of frames and all while animating. We won't really be touching this part much for a while since we're just starting out in Blender. Here we have our properties tab where you can add where you find your modifiers. We'll be using this quite a lot, but I won't dive into them right now. We'll get to know them as we go through Blender. The more we use Blender, the better we get with using these features. And here we have our materials. This is where we add our textures and every other thing here in Blender. And then up here we have our view layer. Whatever is in our scene, we can see them highlighted out here. To add something new to this scene, you can just come to come to add, come to mesh, and then we can add a cube. And then we can see this cube that we just added. We can hit Ctrl Z here in Blender to undo an action. You hit Ctrl Z to undo an action. So with this thing, before we proceed, we'll probably be deleting everything we see here because we don't really need it. We don't really need what we see here, so probably deleting everything. Since I said for At the end of this video, we are going to be making a basic scene so we get a feel of how it is to model here in Blender. There are a lot of shortcuts we are going to be using while we walk through Blender. There are a lot of shortcuts, but I won't just hit you up with all of them right now. I'll share them with you as we walk through creating the artwork we are going to do right now. So here we have, before we continue, here we have our object mode. This is where we see the object in its physical features, and then when we go into the edit mode, we can see the more, I'll say, detailed structure of the object with its vertices and all. And here we can edit this object. We can edit this object. To grab this point, you hit G and it allows you to grab a point. You hit G and then you can manipulate the vertices of this object. And this will help you a lot when modeling complex shapes. This is the edge select. This is the vertex select, sorry. This allows you to select vertices in the object. And then here you have the edge select, which allows you to select edges in the object. And then you have the face select mode that allows you to select faces in the object. So for now, we'll come back to the object mode. To select everything in the scene, we use a shortcut key, Control A. Sorry, you hit A to select everything. Select everything in the scene, you hit A, and then you hit delete to get rid of everything in the scene. And now, first things first, what we'll be adding to this scene is a plane. I like to start out with adding a plane. We're adding a plane. We scale this plane to scale. You hit S. You can actually do this with other parts of the properties here. You can use this to scale. You can use this to scale on the X and on the Y axis. But it's very good to get used to using the shortcut keys because they will make your work a lot faster, your workflow a lot faster. So to scale this, we hit S and drag. And whenever you perform any action in Blender, you get this little tab here where you can edit to get precise values. What I did here is when you click on a single column, you can only edit the values in that column. But when you hold and drag through all columns, then you can edit the value of all columns at the same time to get equal proportions like I just did. So now we've added our plane. The next thing we're going to be adding is a camera, because to render out this scene, we're going to need to look through a camera. So adding a camera, you can come here to add things to your scene, or you can hit Shift A to do that as well. So we've just added in a camera, and usually the camera is generated at the origin of the scene. So to move this to a more suitable location in your scene to get a good view, because your viewing angle in 3D is very important. How you where you position your camera to view your scene is very important in 3D. Otherwise, you get wrong lighting or capture the objects wrongly in a weird perspective. So now that I have a camera in, we move the scene to, let's say, somewhere you want it to be. I think this is good enough for what I want to make out right now. Yeah, this should be good enough. With our camera selected, we come to view, align view, and then you hit this align active camera to view, and that will automatically align your camera to this your selected view. Now to edit this camera, you come to the side panel where you can transform the properties of this particular object you are selecting, which is the camera right now. So right now this camera is wrongly positioned. So to adjust it a bit, you move it down on the Z axis. We hit 0 for the Y rotation. I'll do 55 for the Z axis rotation, and then for the X axis rotation, I think the camera is pretty far out from our scene right now. And to correct this, we can just come out of the camera view to adjust where our camera is positioned. Yeah, this should be better. Okay. And also, I don't want to. We have camera perspective and frames, and right now it is currently in the landscape mode. Like, we have a resolution of 1920 by 1080. To change this, you come here into format, scene format, and then we can edit this here. And right now I want to make a portrait, or let's make it a square view which is suitable for Instagram. So we'll have 1080 by 1330. This should be Instagram's resolution. Yeah, this should be Instagram's resolution. We have to move the camera in a bit on the X and Y axis. And then move it up as well on the Z axis. Also, while working in Blender, we have to make sure to be careful of our perspective, because there's a perspective with which the human eye see things, and when that is not like accurately recreated, the human eyes can easily notice these errors. So I think a decent perspective I like working with is the 35mm. If you hit the camera properties, you can find this here where you adjust the pass of the camera. When you come to viewport display, you can set the pass so you don't see the background and get distracted. So we only focus on what is in the center of this scene. Yeah, this should be perfect to work with. So since we're making a very basic scene, we'll just be adding in some shapes to create like an abstract scene. While we walk through it, you see what I mean. So Shift A to add in, come to mesh, add in a cube. Come to your view so you can see where the cube is positioned. Now, instead of coming to the side panel at all times to edit the properties of this cube, I'm going to be using shortcuts and telling you the shortcuts as I walk through it. So select the cube, hit G, and then X to move the cube on the X axis. Hit G and then Y to move the cube on the Y axis, and hit G and Z to move it up on the Z axis. This cube looks quite huge right now, so I'll be scaling it down a bit. And then to rotate, you hit R, and then you select your axis to rotate it on. So I'll be hitting X to rotate it on the X axis, and then R, Z to rotate it on the Z axis. All I'm basically doing is just rotating this cube to give me a particular look. I'll be adding a few more shapes. Hit Shift A to add in let's do a cone. Let's do a cone. We reduce the vertices of the cone because we can subdivide this later. But when we start in with too much resolution, we cannot reduce the resolution. But when you start with little resolution, you can take up that resolution. So I'll be doing this. This should be fine. Hit G, Z to move it up on the Z axis. Grab X to move it on the X axis and Y to move it on the Y. You know what? I want this to be exactly above the cube, so I'll be coming out of my camera view and then hit Z to move to top view. To see through objects, I will be switching to the X-ray mode by clicking this toggle X-ray, switch to X-ray mode. I want this point of the cone to be perfectly aligned with this point of the cube, so hit G, X to move it on the X axis, G, Y to move it on the Y. You get, just to get it aligned like so. Let's scale it up a bit. I only have a vague view of what we're making right now, and aside from that, I don't have a drafted out scene. I'm just trying to create something random from shapes. I think last but not least, we'll add a torus into the scene. Sorry, I think I made a mistake there. When adding a torus, you need to edit the properties just like we did with the cone. So we'll make this 6, we'll make this 12. No, let's make this 12. Let's make this 24. Yeah, that should be good enough. And then with torus, we have to edit this as well. I'll go with 0.15 for this. Hit S to scale it up. G to move it on the Y axis. GY to move it on the Y axis, and then GX to move it on the X axis. Also, these shapes are in the center of the cylinder. If we don't call that a cylinder. Okay, now hit G to move it up on the Z axis, and then RX to rotate it on the X axis, and then hit S to scale it. This is basically the kind of shape we are going for. I think they're a little bit to the left, so to move them all, you hold down shift and select all objects, and then hit G to grab all of them. To make the shapes look smooth, because you can see the jagged edges, to make them smooth, you right click on your mouse to get this pop-up option. You right click on your mouse and then you hit shade smooth. I normally don't use shade smooths on edges like this, just on shapes that have circular properties, if you get what I mean. I don't regularly use shade smooth on flat and sharp edges. So even though we've used shade smooth on this, we can still see this weird geometry going on in the shape. To fix this, we come to modifier. You hit add modifiers, and then you come to generate. And in generate, you see something called the subdivision subsurface. when you hit this, it adds more subdivision and geometry to your shape, making it look more organic and smoother, if you get what I mean. So when you hit it, it has added just one level of subdivision. You can increase this to make it even smoother. Now it has added 2 levels of subdivision. If you look at the shape now, it looks a lot smoother, if you can tell. We are going to do the same thing for the cone. We're going to add the subdivision of 2. Now, the reason why the cone looks like this is because its geometry is not properly defined. To fix this weird thing going on, you're going to go into the edit mode. You can come up here to go to edit mode, or you can just hit tab to go into the edit mode. Now, to fix this, we just need to add more geometry to define how this should be subdivided and how it should look. Okay, you know what? Instead of dealing with the complicated geometry of this cone, we are going to add in a sphere. That should be much easier to work with. So Shift A, mesh, add in a UV sphere. Switch to your top view by hitting Z. Hit G to grab, move it on the X-axis. Remember to toggle on X-ray. Hit G to grab, move it on the Y. To zoom in like this, I am scrolling, like, you know, every mouse has a scroll wheel. I am using the scroll wheel of my mouse to zoom in like I am zooming in right now. So it is very important you have a mouse when you are doing 3D. It is very important. You can't do it without a mouse, to be honest. Yeah, so once that's perfectly in the center, you hit G, grab and move it up in the Z axis. Yeah, and then we have a shape like this. We are going to scale it a bit. Yeah, this should be fine. We come to the modifier. Before that, right click and hit shade smooth. And it looks pretty decent already. But to just round it up, I'll give it a subdivision level of 1. 1 should do. And then I'm going to apply this subdivision. I think I'm going to apply this subdivision as well. Here and there we have our basic shape layouts. We have our camera and then the basic shapes. This plane I added at first is going to be our floor for this scene. And now that we have this, you might be wondering, oh, sorry to mention this late, but whenever you're doing 3D, you should always remember to save your file, because at times your file might grow so large and Blender will crash. Blender crashes a lot, and I am sorry that happened to anyone following this tutorial already. So first things first, you hit Ctrl S to save your file. That's the shortcut to save a blend file. I'll be saving this in my desktop for now because it's easy to access that way. I'll be calling this tutorial file, and I'll be saving it in my desktop. So whenever you make any changes, you hit Ctrl S and it will save it as you go. You hit Ctrl S so you don't lose progress if, unfortunately, Blender crashes, which it does a lot. So now we have our basic scene. And then to view this rendered, we come here to see the render properties of this scene. We have 3 rendering engines in Blender. We have the Eevee, which is quick but less realistic and quite tough to... When you do lighting in Eevee, you have to be careful of volumetrics because they don't function like circles, like the circle render engine. Here we have the circle render engine, and this is more realistic, and this is true ray tracing. And I like to stick to using circles as much as I can to get the best results. If you have a GPU in your laptop or PC, it's advisable you switch to using your GPU. it makes everything you do in Cycles quicker, because Cycle consumes a lot of computer power. And then for your viewports, so this doesn't take too much time, you can set this to 200. And then for your final render, you can get away with 500, but we're doing 1024, or you can set this to 500. Make sure to turn on the noising, because you get a lot of noise when you render 3D scenes, depending on how you light it up. And then we have this new AGS feature which came out with Blender 4.0. It was not here, this color management mode. We only had the filmic and standard before, but now we have AGX, which is very much realistic when using lighting now. And for the look, we are going to go with high contrast, because I like to see colors in my render. And that is basically it for the render settings. And then for the scene format, we set up our resolution. And since we are not making an animation, I'll be setting this to end at 1 frame. And then we can choose our output location. I want the result to be rendered into the desktop, so I can easily access it. And then, yeah, since we are not if we're making a video or an animation, we'll be rendering in AVI JPEG or AVI RAW. FFmpeg is actually the best to render, but I like to render with this to keep my resolution quality before I edit it in any external software. But now we are just going to render in a photo, so we'll be using PNG. We'll be switching to RGB since we will not need any transparency in our final render. And then we'll be reducing compression to 0 so we get the best quality in the output. So now what we can see here is the solid viewport shading of this scene. And if you hit here, the second option, you will see the material view of this scene. This is the material view, where you see your material when you start texturing this. And then here you see the rendered view. This is what it would look like if it was rendered. You are seeing this right now because there's currently no light in this scene. There's absolutely no lighting. So let's add in a light. Hit Shift A, come down to lighting and add in an area light. Lighting can get pretty complicated in Blender, but I'll be making this fairly simple since it's just a beginner tutorial. Hit G and Z to grab the light and move it up on the Z axis. We'll be rotating this on the X axis to get an angle on the lighting. G, grab it and move it on the Y, and then we'll be scaling this. Now to increase the intensity of this lighting, you can see a bulb option now that we added the light. Unlike the material options that come with the normal objects, when it's a light you're adding or a camera, we get the light property or the camera data property. But right now we're getting the light data property, and with this we can increase the intensity of our lights. Let's go with 50 to see what that looks like. Let's go with 500, see what that looks like. This feels too intense, I think. Let's do 350. Okay, something else to put in mind is the scene is also being influenced by the world light. If you click this world looking icon here, you can see the world properties of this scene. And currently it is not totally dark, so the world is also influencing the lighting in this scene. If we turn off our lights right now, we can still barely see this, and that's because of the world lighting. So if we totally turn that to 0, we'll be getting a pitch black scene. And then when we turn our lights back on, the scene will only be affected by the light we have in it. To get rid of these dark edges around it, we'll be adding in a second light just to illuminate these highlights we have here. So hit Shift A and then add in area light. G to grab and move it up on the Z axis. arrow to rotate on the X, and then you hit 90 to rotate it exactly 90 degrees. Now you hit G and grab it on the Y axis to move it to the side. Now let's scale this up 5 times. Hit S to scale and type 10. Sorry. Correct that. Let's make it 5. Now for the lighting property, we can increase the lighting to, let's say, 50. Yeah, this should work. Or let's reduce that a bit so we can get a bit of contrast. Let's do 30 or 20. Yes, this should work. Also, to get a more interesting thing, we can manipulate the colors of each light to give a studio effect to the scene. So let's do that. Let's make this yeah, let's make that a bit more subtle. Yeah, and then for the other lights, we can make this more pinkish. You should get what I'm driving at now. You should get what I'm driving at now. And now we have our lighting laid down. Let us texture these shapes a bit to so it doesn't just look plain and simple like this. Let us add some textures to this. Now to add textures, I like to see what I'm working on the side. So I'll be closing this timeline. Since we are not working on animation, this will just be bothering us. To close the timeline, at the edge of this, you should see our icon change. When it changes, you can grab this and then it will close the bottom tab or the bottom window. And then you can also do that to expand a new window. So yeah, we have the geometry node editor, texture node editor, compositor. We'll get to know how to use this as we progress using Blender. What we need right now is the shader editor to add shades and textures to the objects in our scene. Like I said earlier, you definitely need a mouse to do 3D, otherwise this will be very difficult to navigate. So a shortcut to go back to your rendering or material view is Z. So you hit Z and you come to your material view so we can see the materials of this object. I'm only going to be adding basic colors to this shape. So for this, let's add in a red. Hit new, name this red. And here we have our principled BSDF. And as you make changes, you should be able to physically see change in your material viewports. So we'll be going for red for this. And then we can increase how metallic the shape looks with this. But I don't want it to look metallic, so I'm going with this. And then for the roughness, you can increase its roughness or reduce its roughness. I want this quite rough. I want this quite rough. So that's that for that one. For this one, let's go with let's do this first. Let's go with blue. I know I might have bad taste in colors, but this is what's coming to my head right now. Let's rename this blue. Why for this we should go with what do we do for this one? Yeah, let's do purple. Let's do purple. Increase roughness. Um, yeah. And then for the base, I want this to have a glass-like look, so it reflects this object on top of it. So I'll be naming this glass floor. So to make this look like a glass, we can mess with the alpha and the IOR and stuff, but I rather just Blender has a shader for glass, and I will just rather use that glass shader. So what I did was I just selected the principal BSDF shader and hit delete to get rid of it. And then you can come to add, and here you can find the glass BSDF. You add this into the surface, connect this to the surface, and then you get the glass texture straight up. To see how this will look like once it's rendered, you can hit Z and then select rendered. Now you get to see what it looks like rendered, and it does not look like what I want it to look like. So we're going to manipulate the ROI of the glass till we get something we want. We can also increase the brightness of this light to get more light into the scene. Yeah, this doesn't look too bad. To close this tab, we just drag this over, and then we can see our rendered scene. And that is basically how it is working through to creating an artwork in Blender. It's not, once you use the app more, you get used to this over time, using the shortcuts and navigating Blender's interface. And also to show you what this will look like if it was rendered in Eevee, let's come to the render properties and we change cycles to Eevee. And this is what this will look like if it was rendered in Eevee. You can see what I mean by it is not as realistic as using cycles, because you can see how wrong most things are. And then to get the glass shader to work properly in Eevee, you have to make some tweaks here and there. So I'll be sticking to cycles for this. You can see the difference between Eevee and cycles. Eevee is quite realistic. Cycles is quite realistic, while Eevee is quick. So now to render this scene out, remember to hit Ctrl S to save this. To render this scene out, you come to render and hit render image. And then depending on how powerful your PC is, this might take a while. This PC I am running this I'm currently using is running on Intel Core i7, 16 gigs of RAM, and an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3060 with 4 gigs of RAM. So depending on the specs of your PC, this might take a while to render out. But as you can see, this is the kind of result you'll be getting if you follow these tutorials, and I think this is a pretty decent artwork for just starting out Blender. This is pretty decent, it looks neat. You can share this and it gives you a feel of what it's like to use Blender and create. So if you follow this tutorial to the end and ended up with something like this, you can share it on IG and tag me on Twitter and let me see what you guys came up with. If you got stuck anywhere or have questions, you can drop them in the comment section and I'll be sure to reply or make a video in response to your questions and probably where you got lost. This is my first time making a YouTube tutorial, so I might have fumbled somewhere or probably not carried you guys along enough, but I'll be sure to do better on the next one. So yeah, the scene is done rendering, and here is scene is done rendering. Now to save this rendered image, you hit image, hit save as, and then you select where you want to save it, and I'll call this tutorial results and hit save. This should not be my desktop. So Blender might be quite daunting and challenging when you're first starting out, but learning it, you get results like this, and they are quite decent results. There's no limits to what you can create. You just have to take time and get used to using the software, follow through with tutorials. I'll be linking some very good tutorials here on YouTube that you can follow through. And that's it until next time. Thanks for watching, guys.